This is the Uncolored Podcast. My name's Kevin Metcalf. I'm the host. Thanks for tuning in. This is a tough one. This is like the 9th time I've done this. I've done it, I've listened to it, hated it, and then re-recorded it about 7 or 8 different times. Hopefully this one will work. So let's just get into it before I change my mind and not do it at all. That's probably the best, but to hell with it. I'm doing it anyway. So, a lot about what this podcast is about is the central theme that I think that most of the conversations that people have are not about science, they're not about politics, they're not about social things. They're really about religious arguments. It feels more like one religion arguing against another religion than anything about objective data. Because there's so much objective data around in all of those areas, but it seems to be ignored depending on a person's religious perspective. And I know people think that, obviously when you say religion, you think of, one of the main religions or Catholicism or something centered around God or people going to church or that kind of thing. But I don't think that's what religion really is. And so just to start off, I'm going to clarify once again, and I know I've done this before, but, I think it bears repeating. And it helps me figure it out, too. It helps me think through it again every time I say it. So what is a religion? This is how I think it is. I think we believe things, obviously, because there are things that are just simply on the edge of our understanding, and you kind of go by, well, it seems to be true, more kind of an intuition, I guess. But you really don't have the data to prove it. It just seems like that's the way things are. I think religions begin when that intuition and the phenomena that the intuition is based upon becomes something that you act as if it's a fact, rather than just something that seems to be true. And the obvious examples are, believing that God exists, and the same thing with the other side, believing that God does not exist. Both are intuitions, I think, that people have. And there are certain phenomena, data, that supports that intuition, but falls far short of proving it as an absolute fact. And I think that's what religions are basically based on. One being the belief that God exists, and people have their intuitive beliefs and data and things surrounding that. And then there's a group of people who believe that God does not exist, and that's mainly the atheist idea. And I know atheists think that it's the logical default position. It's all about reasons. Sorry to disappoint you. It's just another religion, just like any other religion. You can't prove that God does not exist. And a lot of what they believe can't be proven. And as I'm going to show in the area of science, it causes a lot of problems when you cut out the possibility of some, transcendent being, as the creator of the universe. It creates a lot of problems when it comes to science, and we'll look at just one of those. But the point being is, people, I think, have intuitions based on how, life seems. And when I say intuition, I mean things seem to be like this. Something happens and you think that's the way it seems to be. That's the correct way. And there's data that may support it or not support it. But I think left like that, not further investigated, leaves it open to a sort of a religious thing. And I think it's good, and I think I should make the point here. There are theist philosophers, and they make these arguments, that are philosophical arguments for the existence of God. And while there are people who make these arguments and say that proves God exists, and I've heard these arguments, and listen, I don't find a problem with them. I mean, I agree it implies what they say it does. So it's not that I have a problem with the argument. I don't know that it qualifies as a proof. Not because I'm any judge of the thing. It's just that I don't really know enough about these kinds of arguments. I mean, it's argumentation, apparently it's like a whole science. And it has its own language. When you see these arguments in their, I don't know what kind of the form, but they're just, it's like some kind of a weird math, it seems like. But anyway, Alvin Plantinga, he's a theist philosopher. And one of the things he says with his arguments, and he makes some very good arguments. He makes a couple of those arguments that I think people use as, the defining arguments supporting the idea of God's existence. But I think he makes a point to say that it doesn't prove God's existence. It simply says that it's simply an argument showing that the idea of the existence of God is a reasonable idea. I think that's really what he's saying. Although, to be perfectly clear, I think they do believe in God exists as a religious belief. But I think scientifically and just as a pure philosophical thing, what they're saying is that there's evidence and argument and reason that supports that a belief that there's some God, a creator, is a reasonable belief to hold. And I share that belief. I've used the example of, the room full of dominoes, with a complicated setup of dominoes that are a picture or something like that. Nobody walks into a room where there's this elaborate, array of dominoes stacked up to form some sort of a pattern. Nobody goes, oh, that was an accident. The most reasonable conclusion to come to is somebody put it there. The same with things like, what's that thing in England where Stonehenge? Same thing there. People look at Stonehenge and nobody goes, oh, it was an accident of nature. People intuitively think, yeah, somebody put it together, even though you may not know how I don't know if they know how. Maybe they figured out how that Stonehenge thing was put together. But even if you don't know, intuitively you go, somebody built this somehow. I think just recently in Africa, they discovered something similar where there are these huge slabs that these multi-ton slabs on top of rocks that look like some sort of a domicile or a cover, at least from the elements that are sitting there on these big rock formations, and nobody know how they got there. But again, nobody postulates that it was an accident of nature. You just know that somebody put it there for some reason. And I think when you look at some of the implications of science like biology, microbiology, the study of the cell, that's not the one, quantum mechanics, the implications are that there's some mind or something out there that has to do with creation of everything that we know, just objectively and scientifically. And again, we'll get into that. And the problem is that if your religion states that there can be no such entity, then there's a lot of scientific problems that are difficult to solve, especially when it comes to origin of life, the field of origin of life. And that's a whole, apparently, scientific field, origin of life, where they're trying to understand how life began. And that focuses on the elements of a prebiotic earth and how you can suddenly get life. And I say prebiotic. I say that word like I know what it means. I mean, I know what it means. I just learned it last week. There was a book I was reading that the word came up like 8 different times, and I got to figure out what this thing says, what prebiotic means. and basically, prebiotic means before life. That's all it is. So apparently, at some point in time, life began, and the question is, how did that start? Because nobody's been able to replicate that process. And one of the things in science is that if you can replicate something, it shows that you understand something. And if you can't replicate it, it shows that you really don't know what the hell you're doing. Which is one of the problems with all the global warming models, because none of them come up right, which illustrates, maybe they don't know what the hell they're talking about. So that's basically what a religion is. It's a belief that you have about something, and rather than, you act as though it's a fact. But then the question is, and this is just a recent thing I started thinking about, and it'd be interesting to hear what you guys think about this. You guys, nobody's listening to this. But then the question came up, how does a religion even begin? Because, Judaism, things like that, I'm sure they had a beginning someplace. And it seems as though, because I thought about it this way. It's hard for me to believe that, again, if you understand the world as being started by, a God, And when I say God, I'm not talking about any particular religion, because I don't belong to a religion. I used to be and when I was growing up, I was a fundamentalist Christian, but I haven't done that for about 25 years. So I'm not talking about any particular God. I'm simply saying the idea of some, again, intelligence beyond space and time, that I'm using that as a term because I don't know what a better term to use. So it's hard for me to believe that if there was I shouldn't say if, I think the most reasonable position is to think there is. So I'm going to go from that perspective. So when God creates the planets and all that stuff, he's got all this thing working perfectly. I find it hard to believe that at some point in time he goes, you know what? I got to make sure the Jews are wearing hats and have curly Q sideburns. I don't think that God told anybody that. I don't think God said, hey, you Catholics, I got the planets just right. Don't screw it up. Make sure your hats are very pointy, and you need to have elaborate robes, and your services should be in, Latin. I need that to happen, for the universe to work properly. I don't think he cares that the Amish, whether they have iPhones or stuff. I don't think he goes, hey, you Amish folks, no technology after, 1890? That's because I'm God and I need that to happen. I don't think there's a lot of religions that have all kinds of different practices and, the way they, exercise their religion. And it seems to me that that's less about understanding, God or, whatever the religion is intended to do. And it seems more about organizing groups of people. And I think depending on the where and the when and the location and, the conditions and the time of, the history of I think those different phenomena cause people to organize themselves differently. And I think what happened is when you get the right people, maybe the smartest or the most highly regarded people in society, form an idea or an intuition based on the phenomena that they see and they understand. And I think when you get enough of the right people who say something is the way it is, I think the rest of the knuckleheads just sign on. I think most people, we don't like to think for ourselves. And if we find somebody who if we like or admire or if we have friends who are believing something, typically we'll do what they're doing without question, without even asking, does it make sense? As a matter of fact, I know that that's the case. I think there's a few people who are the movers and shakers of society. I think the vast majority of people simply sign on because they like the people who are associated with it. I don't even think most people think about it. I think if people thought about a lot of the things that they build their lives around, I don't think they do it. Doesn't make sense, most of it. Now, I don't want to get into it now because there's far too many to mention, but I think that has something to do with how religions begin, whether that be your traditional religions or whether things like feminism, Marxism, those ideas. I think people just glom on and, like the Pied Piper, follow along with the music that seems best to them. But it's interesting that it has such an emotional connection to them that they don't, not only are they willing to challenge, or are they willing to challenge their own ideas and assumptions, they'll be damned if they let anybody else do it. And that's that weird religious culty part of it, that people don't even want their presuppositions even challenged. So in this particular podcast, I wanted to look at a couple of people. Enter in Neil deGrasse Tyson and Dr. James Tour. These are very, very different people on two opposite sides of the aisle. So Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's a very popular, he's a theoretical astrophysicist. I don't know what that is, but let me read his Wikipedia CV. That'll tell you enough about him. So Dr. Tyson, I don't know if he's, well, I guess he's Dr. Tyson, I would imagine. Education, Harvard, University of Texas, Columbia University. He's got the NASA Distinguished Public Service Medal, Klops Peg Memorial Award, Public Welfare Award. His fields are astrophysics, physical cosmology, science communication, Institute of Thesis, So he's, let's see, career. His career has focused on observations in cosmology, stellar evolution, galactical astronomy, bulges, stellar information. I don't know what bulges are. He's held numerous positions in institutions, blah, 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 blah. And so he's hosted TV stuff. So mostly he's a media scientist guy. He's on TV, he has debates, and he shows up on different programs and things like that and talks about theories and stuff like that. I don't know everything about him, so I'm going to make some assumptions that I think are true, but I could be wrong. It seems as though he's on the atheist religion. He's an atheist, and from the few lectures that I've seen him do, he seems more of an evangelist for atheism than, well, listen, I'm sure he does science stuff. I imagine somebody that smart, who the hell is he? Well, there's only so much you can talk to the general public about stuff. So I'm sure he's incredibly smart, and he just, talks about the atheism stuff because that's, you got to know your crowd. But it appears as though, and this is to me, this is the religious part of it. It seems he has a real problem with scientists who believe in God or have a personal relationship with God or pray to God, whatever it is. But Tyson, like a lot of atheists, have a real problem with the idea of God being connected in any way with science. And he really has a problem with scientists who are religious folks. So this is what these are some of his opinions about that.
It depends on which study you get. He asked, do you pray to a personal God? These numbers vary, but they're high and they're up around 90%. Among all people with masters and PhDs, the religiosity drops somewhere around 60%, might be 65. The point is, it drops with education level. Now let's bring in scientists. How about what percentage of scientists in America are religious? You average over all the branches, it's about 40%, maybe 35%. Now you go to the elite scientists. This is a well-known number. 7% are religious, claiming a personal God to whom they pray and intervene in their lives. These are scientists among us in the National Academy of Sciences who are religious and pray to a personal God, and I know some of them. Maybe there's something in the brain wiring that positively prevents some people from ever being an atheist. I submit to you that with the current atheist fervor that has taken on over the past several years, I would say the modern atheists are called, launched by the Dawkins book and the Hitchens book and the Sam Harris book and the like. And I was just in Borders recently. Couldn't believe it. Sorry I didn't have a camera. Borders books. There it was. A section called Atheism. It was like, I'd never seen that before. It's like, okay. There it was. They had enough critical mass of books to make a section. And if that's the case, in a way, they can't help it. And you'll never know it because you're not one of them. So I ask you, first, for compassion with the public, but you should target your exercise and your experiments on understanding that number, because that's not zero.
So that's the, he's very adamant about the scientists. It's interesting because there's an arrogance about atheists that I sense. And I sense the same thing here. And I wonder if that's just part of the religion. Because I think if you're an atheist, Intelligence is the thing. So if you're not an atheist, if you somehow think that the possibility of, God exists, it's not that there's any good reason for it. It's that there's something wrong with your brain wiring, which would, imply that the only people who have proper brain wiring are atheists. And I'll tell you what, I think they might believe that. I think that might be part of their religious belief, because it seems like with atheists that like if you were to take a Christian or Catholic or more, it seems that how good of a Christian or how much you're serious about the faith. They measure in your holiness or your spirituality, with regard to your particular faith. How he's a very spiritual man, he's a very dedicated spiritual, person with their religion. I think the atheist equivalent to spirituality is intelligence. And I think they believe that the more intelligent you are, then there's no room for the idea that somebody could be smarter than you, or there could be any entity smarter than you, or that you could be a created being. And I'm not quite sure. I haven't quite got my head around it because I'm not that smart, which explains a lot. But it's interesting that there seems to be an arrogance that there doesn't seem to be any other reasonable possibility that they don't know what the hell they're talking about. And like I said, I don't know that my brain isn't wired properly, but I don't know how Neil would know that either. But the assumption is if you believe that there's a creator, not that there's any reason to believe it, it's just that your wiring is wrong. And I think that comes from what I believe is the de facto, I don't know if it's a sub-religion or one of the sects of atheism, is the idea of materialism or naturalism. And that's the idea, it's a scientific idea, I believe, that basically says that everything is matter. There's nothing intangible. If you can't see it, touch it, or measure it, it doesn't exist. And it just seems logically, I don't know why you would put a box around just the things that you can detect. I mean, I don't know why you would not leave open the possibility that there are things going on that you're just simply not aware of. But I think that ties in with the arrogance that their high intelligence, or at least their personal perception of their own intelligence, gives them, is that there just can't be anything going on that they're not aware of. And I think that's a flaw. I mean, I think that's one of the Achilles heels of the whole religion, because as I'm going to show, evolution is one of the foundational principles of atheism. Evolution is pretty much the atheist's creation story. And I know the atheists, make a lot of fun of Christians and other religions that have, they think God created the world, and they think, that's just let's say it's just a creation story. Well, atheism is the same thing. I mean, evolution is the same thing for atheists. Evolution is their creation story. Because for atheism, there could not be an intelligent creator, so it had to have happened by accident. But again, as I'm going to show, that causes a lot of problems. But again, some of the religious terms that I heard in that little segment, and you should listen to the whole thing. I'll put a link to it so you can hear the whole thing. But one of the things he says, I found it interesting that there was applause for an atheist section in a bookstore, because it seems to me that, I don't know. I wasn't aware that atheists felt, underrepresented, that somehow atheism wasn't a good thing. Because it seems like education and science sort of have a lock on, atheism. Atheism seems to have a lock on education and science. And I think, going from some of the scientists I read and some of the stories that I read, listen, if you say anything about God in science or education, they'll kick your ass out. And the other thing that I found interesting that he says that you're not one of them. It's again, the us and them thing. seem like less about science and more about religion. That's why I think that these things are really not about science and evidence and objective, an objective search for understanding. It's more about my religion's better than your religion, and we need to get rid of your religion because I feel it's a threat to my religion. That's what this whole speech seems to be about, because, at the end of it, him saying that you should target your experiments, and maybe that's not what he was saying, but, with saying that, first of all, their brains aren't working right, and so you should target your experiments towards that, all of those things sound particularly pernicious and not scientific, but just kind of religious zealotry, in my opinion. So, the opposite of that is a guy that I just discovered a couple of months ago. His name is Dr. James Tour. Now, Dr. James Tour, I'm going to let him tell you about himself, because he's also a very impressive scientist, and his work is in more. Let me just give you his CV. I'm going to let him tell you about who he is, because I'll get it wrong and I don't understand most of it.
Dr. James Tour is the most distinguished nanotechnology researcher in the world. T.T. and W.F. Chow Professor of Chemistry, Professor of Computer Science, Materials Science, and Nanoengineering at Smalley Curl Institute and Nanocarbon Center at Rice University in Houston, Texas.
I got my PhD in the field of organic chemistry, postdoc at Stanford University, joined the group of a man who was going to win a Nobel Prize in chemistry, voted one of the top 50 most influential minds in the world. I was a visiting scholar at Harvard University. I've spoken at every major university in this country, have over 650 research publications, voted the R&D magazine Scientist of the Year. I'm in the National Academy of Inventors. I'm a member of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, over 120 patents, started 7 or 8 companies. We work in areas that range from medicine to materials science to electronics, computer memory, medical devices. We work across a broad range of areas. But more than any of that, what means the most to me is that I'm a Jew who believes that Jesus is the Messiah.
Okay, so that's Dr. Tour. Pretty impressive. All these guys are impressive. They've all done a bunch of crazy stuff. For a second I thought about leaving that last part out because it's so it's so dramatic. But clearly that's who he is. And I figure, listen, if he's okay with it, then I'm okay with it. There's no reason I should object if he's down with it. After all the things that he's accomplished and as great as a scientist as he is. But look, you couldn't get more opposite Neil deGrasse Tyson than James Tour. Not in just their belief. If you go on James Tour's website, he makes no bones about it. There's nobody more Christian than James Tour, and he's very clear about that. But what I love about Dr. James Tour is that he can separate his religious beliefs from scientific evidence. And there are few people who do it better than him. Other people like Stephen Meyer, Michael Behe, a lot of those people they're fully into the Christian religion. They're very much devout Christians, but they're also on the cutting edge of science when it comes to origin of life in this field of origin of life. And I think that's what the problem I think atheists have with it, but I'll get to that towards the end. So here's Dr. James Tour. I'm gonna play a little bit of a seminar. I don't know if it's a seminar or whatever, but he did. And what he's talking about is just some of the challenges that people who believe that we evolved from nothing have to contend with. And it's some very serious problems. And not only I'm going to make a prediction. I think that from what I've heard and what I've been reading, I think in about 10 or 20 years, evolution will be done. I don't think any any self-respecting scientist or educator will mention evolution with regards to how we all got here. Unless some amazing discovery happens, and it doesn't look like it, it seems as though the more they learn about the cell, the less likely that it was an accident. And especially, again, this quantum mechanics thing, and I'll do that in another podcast because that's another big crazy thing. But anyway, this is Dr. James Tour, and he's going into this spiel. He'll talk a little bit more about what he's done. Oh, and the other thing that I love about Dr. James Tour is this. He's an applied scientist. He just doesn't walk around talking and giving off theories that, you can never prove or disprove. I think that's a safe area that Dr. Tyson walks into. He talks about hypothetical this and what it could possibly be and all that crap. Dr. Tour, he's in it. He's doing some incredible things. He's got 5 or 6 or 7 companies that are into technology, biomechanics. He's doing stuff to cure cancer. He's got this thing where he can, put a spine together. He's working on a way to make people who've had spine injuries so they can walk again. Crazy stuff. But I'll let him tell you because, again, I'll mess it up. I hardly understand it.
We split carbon nanotubes, and we use these in medicine, and we use these also in electronics and batteries, lithium metal batteries. Corrosion inhibitors are already on the market. We're working on spinal cord repair, peripheral nerve repair, optic nerve repair. So we're trying to build technologies that can do this, and this is real. We do this type of thing. We can cut a spinal cord completely in half in a rat and fuse this back up so the rat within 3 weeks has a 19 out of 21. 21 is the highest mobility that can be achieved. So it can get to near perfect mobility within 3 weeks. Treatment of pancreatic cancer, that'll be in clinical trials within 1 year at MD Anderson Cancer Center. DNA sequencing, this is doing the entire human genome map, entire human genome, not just 23andMe, the entire genome for $100 in 1 hour. This opens it up now to everyone in the world. Water purification based on laser-induced graphene. This is the traumatic brain injury, stroke, and dementia drug. A company will launch this year. Graphene synthesis at $100 per ton in energy cost, going to concrete, plastic, and metals. That'll launch this year. And then the molecular nanomachines to kill cells. That's going to cancer and the killing of superbugs. Antibiotic resistance, we can drill right through them. And a friend of mine here, Richard, is here, and he works on this as well. So these are areas. So we're real scientists. We do real things. We're going to get into the talk at hand. I'm not going to make any reference to God, any reference to intelligent designer, or anything. I'm just going to allow science to critique the science. What do we have to say about origin of life? What does science tell us? What can we infer here? And so by choice, I am not going to mention God, because if I mention God and Jesus Christ, people will say, oh, Tour introduced the baby Jesus to talk about this. It's not a real talk. All right, this is pure scientific talk. This would work in any medical school, in any chemistry department. Next slide. So this is a cell. What is the origin of life? How do you get a cell like this? What is the origin of something like this? This is an amazing machine. A cell is an amazing machine. It's not just a blob of protoplasm. Every day it gets harder to have the origin of life, to come up with a scenario, because the origin of life becomes more and more complex every day. A cell is a factory. It has the lipid bilayer, which is extremely selective to let certain things in and not other things. It has all of this substructure in here, these little areas where energy is made in here. It has these microtubules which can form, so you can move matter from point A to point B. If you go to a factory, what you see is these overhead hanging machines that are moving materials from point A to point B. Same thing happens in a cell. You get these microtubules to move material from point A to point B. And then as soon as the material is done moving, the microtubule breaks down and then assembles some other place. You say, well, why doesn't it leave it there? Because then the cell would become too rigid. So it just rebuilds it. It's just amazing factory what's happening in a cell. This is what we have to make. If we want to have origin of life, you got to start here. You don't start here. You start with a single cell. Just build a single cell. That's what we have to do in origin of life. Nobody has ever done this. If you've been taught that simple forms of life have been made, that is a lie that you are believing. Somebody told you a lie. That has never been done. Organisms care about life. Molecules don't care. Chemistry, on the contrary, is utterly indifferent to life. Without a biologically derived entity acting upon them, molecules have never been shown to evolve toward life. Never. Molecules don't care about life. They don't know anything about moving toward life. They have no brain. Organisms want to move toward life and keep life going. Molecules don't care about life. Nobody has ever seen molecules assemble toward life. Never. It doesn't happen without a biological entity working on them. I asked all my colleagues, can you show me an example of this? Of molecules moving toward order, moving toward an ordered system where you have a non-regular assembly. Regular assembly is like A or AB. That you can get pure thermodynamic assembly. But non-ordered assembly is a non-regular pattern. That's what you have in DNA. We know from computer science you have to have non-regular patterns in order to have complexity for living systems. And I asked my colleagues, do you have any example of molecules without a biological entity acting upon them to give an ordered assembly that is a non-regular pattern? And they sent me papers where chemists have taken molecules and assembled them in that way. I said, non-biological entity. You can't have a human doing this. Molecules don't move toward life. Well, even if you want to have molecules move toward life and you have human beings working upon them, can the human beings do it? And the answer is no. Critical for life is the origin of information, DNA or RNA. The information is primary and the matter is secondary. We can't even get the matter, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, lipids, proteins, let alone the information. What is the code? Even if you had the nucleic acids and even if you could hook them up, what's the code? Where do you get that code? The information is primary. That's the information. It can be stored on all sorts of mediums. So I have an idea, and then I transcribe this onto a piece of paper, and now it's on the paper. And then I type this into my computer, and it goes into DRAM. And then when I hit save, it goes into flash memory. And then when I upload it to the web, that same information now is going through an RF wave into a box on the wall. And then from that box on the wall, it's going through a wire to some server farm someplace where it goes right back down into transistor-based flash memory. That same information, which was here in my hand, to the paper, in my computer in several different forms, in an RF wave. Same information, different medium. The information is primary. The medium can change all the time. So for example, the molecules in our bodies are always changing. It used to be said that the molecules in our bodies turn over or changed every 7 years. And that's a bunch of nonsense. They're changed continually. Every molecule in your body is undergoing a proton exchange. Proton comes with a spin up, a proton comes with a spin down. Every one of these now is a different molecule in the sense that it has different atoms that make it up. Maybe the same pattern of atoms, but a different atom. You had a different proton exchange. Every molecule is continuing to change. We are dynamic structures constantly changing. What is the real me? I don't know what the real me is. If you want to say it's the matter is the real me, then you got a big problem because it's constantly changing. This is what we were talking about earlier, the difference between brain and mind. What is the real me? Interactomes. This is the non-covalent interactions that function within a cell. Nobody knows how a viable cell emerges from massive combinatorial complexity of its molecular components. And of course, nobody's ever synthetically mimicked it. An interactome is the whole set of molecular interactions in a particular cell. If one merely considers protein-protein interaction combinations in just a single yeast cell, the result is an estimated 10 to the 79 billion combinations. That's estimated by these folks at Johns Hopkins and Brussels, all right? That's not my estimation. These are biophysicists, all right? So just to give you an idea of how big that number is, that's 10 to the 90th is the number of elemental particles in the universe. That's 10 to the 90th. This is 10 to the 79 billion. That's a big, big number. Let me put it in a way that you understand. 1 million seconds is 11 days. So you ask somebody, will you marry me? I'll tell you in 1 million seconds. Okay. If they say 1 billion seconds, that's 32 years. All right? You feel that now? 1 million to 1 billion? And then if they say 1 trillion seconds, that's 32,000 years. Huh? You see the difference when you go up 3 orders of magnitude? You go 1 million, 10 to the 6th, to 10 to the 9th, to 10 to the 12th. That's 10 to the 79 billion. That number's crazy big. That's just in a single yeast cell, the interactions between the non-bonded interactions. So how does information flow? Information flows through non-bonded interactions through electrostatic potentials, which physicists call a virtual photon. Information goes down these at the speed of light. That depends on ordering between molecules, non-covalent interactions. These have to be all kind of assembled right. And that's why this information, you don't dehydrate cells and rehydrate them and get them to work properly. When a cell divides, it collapses down, puts the information on both halves, and brings it into both sides. So that that information keeps going to the next and the next generation. Because when you lose these intermolecular interactions that are non-covalent, non-attached, you've lost your information flow. Big problem. Nobody has explained. Nobody in Origin of Life ever mentions the word interactomes. Never will you hear it in their literature. If you just take nucleotides, if you just take DNA, DNA is so complex and it has so much information. Look, if you have 6 A bases, A, how can you arrange those? What are the different ways you can arrange it? Just that one, A. That's it. One way you can arrange 6 bases. Look at carbohydrates. If you just take the carbohydrate D-pyranose, just a standard carbohydrate, just D-pyranose, you have 6 of those. Has over 1 trillion ways it can assemble. 1 trillion ways it can assemble just with 6 of them. These have much more than 6. And if it's not assembled right, guess what? The cell dies. You change any one of the carbohydrates, it results in cell death. There is much more information stored in carbohydrate assembly than in DNA. Yeah. Much more information can be stored in carbohydrates. You want to build a massive computer? Build it based on carbohydrate assembly. Much better than DNA assembly. It's just that carbohydrate assembly is really hard to control. Nobody knows how to control this. Nobody. But somehow, on a prebiotic Earth, with nobody around, under a rock, it figured this out. How do Origin of Life researchers address this problem? They don't. They don't.
Okay. So that's Dr. Tour. And, that goes on for like an hour. I just played you, 5 or 10 minutes of it. It goes on for an hour. And that's not all of it. He's got other lectures that he's done. And if according to Dr. Tour, and it's funny. He doesn't say evolution is dead. I'll tell you what, this guy's a very fair guy when the way he presents it. What he basically says is, listen, if this evolution thing is true, you got to explain it to me. Because from what he understands, doesn't work. But he leaves open the possibility that maybe he doesn't understand everything, which I think is the most fair position to be. I mean, listen, in my opinion, this is how you know when you're talking to a scientist or a religious fanatic, okay? Some evangelist for their particular religion or a scientist. When you're talking about a lot of these questions of origin of life, the correct answer is, I don't know. That's the correct answer you'd get. That's the honest scientific answer. We don't know. Now, people have different theories about what possibly happened. But anybody who's telling you that evolution is a fact with regard to origin of life, we're not talking about microevolution. I don't think there's anybody who disagrees about that. I'm talking about that life began through a random, accidental process that got us here. And they say that it's a fact. They're lying to you, I think. And I think they're just an evangelist for the religion of atheism. They're trying to keep their creation story alive. Because I have yet to see the evidence for it. A lot of theories, a lot of stories, a lot of maybe it happened this way, a lot of maybe it happened that way. But I don't see that has any more evidence or any more weight than what you read in the book of Genesis. I don't know how they're different. I don't know how the story of Noah, in the flood is any different from, I did in a couple of podcast episodes when Dawkins, was weaving stories about how the eye developed. It's a nice story, but there's zero evidence for it. And I was always under the understanding that science was about evidence and data, not about who has the most creative story. So, the last part of this is this. So I don't think that the concerns of atheists with regard to having God or the idea of God introduced into science are unwarranted at all, really. I think that there is I think there's good concern. I shouldn't say concern. I think the concern is valid, and this is why. People like Dr. James Tour, Stephen Meyer, Michael Behe, a lot of these scientists who are proponents of the theory for intelligent design, and that's the idea that we were created by some intelligent being, basically God is the theory. They're very clear in every book they write, not every talk that they do. But when they're doing scientific, when they're writing their books, the scientific books, when they're doing debates, scientific lectures, they're very clear and very specific about keeping God and religion out of it. They're very meticulous about that. The problem is everybody isn't. And I think that's what people like, the atheists are afraid of. That once you start introducing God, or there's the suggestion that God has something to do with this, or some creator, and I say God because I don't know a better term to use for it. Their concern is that all kinds of nuts will start coming out, with different religious things, and I think that's a valid concern. I really do, because not everybody knows where the boundary between religion and science begins. As a matter of fact, I think most people don't. Including atheists. I think they're probably the most egregious transgressors in that sense, because I don't think that they understand that their atheism is just another religion. I think they think that's the default position, the most reasonable position, and not another religious position, which I fully think it is. But I'll just read you a couple of comments. This was from another video on YouTube a guy was doing about, the problems with evolution. And then in the comments section, it says, hold on, let me, I want to make sure I get this right. Okay, here it is. This is it's a video on YouTube called Evolution Demolition. And it's, just another video some guy put out on some of the problems that he sees with evolution. And in the comments section, that's the second one here. One of the comments says, "Awesome video. We can only pray for those naysayers who believe in evolution. They are deceived by Satan, just like Darwin and his grandfather were." Okay, now that's what Tyson's worried about. All of the atheists, Tyson, Harris, Boghossian, that's what they're worried about. Their concern is that once you bring in the idea of a creator into science, these folks start popping out. And and nothing against her personally. Listen, everybody, I want to keep saying, I have nothing against, people who have religious beliefs. I have no problem with that, and I think a lot of them are great. I'm not even saying that in a what do you call it, a patronizing way. I think there's some great folks who have religious beliefs, and I think some great things have happened. Our whole Western society is based on, Judeo-Christian beliefs. So listen, I'm no hater of religion. I think it's a great thing. I'm not a part of it, but I know some amazing people who are. And I'm glad that they're there. I don't think people shouldn't be religious. It's not what I'm saying. I'm simply saying that I think it's important to distinguish your religious beliefs from empirical data. That's all. And when somebody brings forth empirical data in support of a theory or an idea, I think it should be dealt with at that level. Just empirical data. Whether that's not injecting religious beliefs centered around God existing, or whether that's religious beliefs centered around the idea that God does not exist. I just think that facts, data, evidence, at least it was always my impression, and I'm no scientist, it's always been my idea that that's what science was supposed to be about, not pushing religious agendas. And it seems like Dr. Neil Tyson does a lot of evangelizing for his atheist religion, which is fine. You know, Tyson is as much entitled to be a religious person as anybody. I don't hate Tyson for having his own religion. I'm simply saying it seems as though he's pointing at other folks for stuff that he's doing. That's what it seems like to me. Science, let science be science, let religion be religion, whether it's science, politics, social policy. I think it's important to whittle away what we wish was true, that we can't support empirically, and the facts and the data, and focus on those things, because that's something that, whether you like it or not, can't be refuted. And that seems a better foundation to make decisions. It seems to me. Of course, I could be totally wrong. All right, that's the first part of it. Thanks for listening. This is the Uncolored Podcast. I'm going to take a quick break, and then I'm going to come back with the Uncolored Sports segment. And I think that's going to be a good one. So stay tuned. Hang around for just a little bit. I'm going to take a quick break. My name is Kevin Metcalf. I'm the host, and this is the Uncolored Podcast. Here's another unsolicited, unsponsored shout out to an organization that I think is pretty good. It's the Wounded Warrior Project. Please consider giving some donations to the folks down at the Wounded Warrior Project. You can find them on woundedwarriorproject.org. They do a lot of good things for our veterans, getting them integrated back into society, mental wellness, physical wellness, all kinds of good stuff, all kinds of good programs and things like that. So if you have time or resources, please consider the Wounded Warrior Project helping them out there. Yeah, that's it. All right, that's enough. Welcome back to the Uncolored Podcast. This is the Uncolored Sports segment where I take, something that happened in sports that's related to the topic at hand or whatever the hell we talk about. I don't know if it's really related, but I think it's interesting to talk about. Today we're going to talk about the Le'Veon Bell conclusion. Le'Veon Bell last year sat out. He was a Steeler last year. In the last NFL season, he sat out for the whole year, forfeited the $14 million that the Steelers was going to pay him in and I'm not a financial guy. It just seems to me, if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, this is my advice. If anybody ever comes up to you and says, hey, listen, I'm going to give you $14 million to play football, it seems the answer should be yes. I'm not a wizard. I'm not an agent. I don't even know the game, in the inner workings of the If somebody says, hey, I'm going to give you $14 million and I just want you to catch the football and run around, you should just say yes. It seems. But Le'Veon Bell thought that was a bad idea, so he held out, forfeited the money. Now he's got $32 million. Seems like a bad idea. Even if the worst thing happened and he got injured, he'd still get paid. There's a guy for the Seattle Supersonics. That's basketball. The Seahawks. He was a defensive, I think he was a linebacker. Busted his leg. was in a contract, last year it was a contract, was all pissed off, flipped the team off as they carted him off the field. Just signed with the Raptors. It's basketball season, not the Toronto Raptors. The Baltimore Ravens for a big contract. So my point is, even if Le'Veon Bell played, got injured, he could have rehabbed and got another contract. Even Adrian Peterson just signed for $6 million with the Redskins. He's 5 years past his prime. He had a serious knee injury and surgery and came back, so he's still getting paid. So the idea that Le'Veon Bell would not have gotten paid if he got injured is, to me, absurd. I don't understand the move. Didn't make sense to me, but again, I'm not his agent. I'm not on the inner workings. That's what he did. But the reason why I think that this is a related issue is because, and I'm not saying anybody's smart, but I'm saying the idea of Marxism, part of the flaw of Marxism, and there are many, is the inability to understand the concept of value. In other words, Marxists and socialists think that whatever they think something is worth, that's what it's worth. And that's never the case. In a free market system, you have an accurate understanding of what value is. Because it doesn't matter what you think something's worth. I don't care if you're making something, you're offering your services. The only time you know the value of something is if there's somebody else out there who A, agrees with you on the value, and B, has the money and is willing to give you that money or whatever you're going to trade it for. It doesn't matter what you think something is value, whatever you think the value, somebody's got to be out there who's going to give you the money. And if they're not, then it's not worth it. That's not the value. And that's what Le'Veon Bell found out. He thought that the Steelers should pay him more. Steelers like, nah, go get it from somebody else. And it's also reported that the Steelers would have given him the same or more than he got with the Jets, who might be a worse team. I don't know. Listen, he's a grown man. He can do what he wants to do. I'm not hating him for rolling the dice on himself. The point I'm trying to make is it was a bad idea. It seems. But there are people out there who are trying to make it sound like it's a good idea. And it's a terrible idea. And one guy here is I heard this on First Things First is a show that I watch on occasion. I watch it pretty much a lot. It's on early enough so I can listen to it while I'm waking up. But it's Chris Carter and a guy named Nick Wright. Nick Wright tends to be a player. He tends to have this sort of leftist. I don't say leftist, but he's got the liberal thing where he's always going for the players and fighting for the players against the owners, that kind of a thing. And I think sometimes it puts him in this weird anti-logic positions. And this is a classic example because his take on what Le'Veon Bell did seemed odd. So I'll let you listen to these guys. It's Chris Carter, Chris Canty, and the last guy you're going to hear is Nick Wright with his take, how he frames the whole thing. So you can hear you can think what you want. You can listen to it and see what you think.
But he thought the height of the marketplace would be a lot greater than what it was.
That part I agree with you, that Le'Veon thought that by sitting out, I guarantee myself 4 years, 60 million, at least, not 4 years, 52, and maybe not 35 million, maybe 38 to 40 million guaranteed. You're calling it a calculated risk. I think a calculated risk would have been playing. I think this was a very expensive insurance policy. I think what this was, he spent $14 million to guarantee himself $30+ million. Now, the gamble would have been, I'm going to take this $14 million. I'm not going to have any insurance policy, and maybe I double dip. Maybe I get the $14 million and the contract on the back end. But there's another.
I just always believe in myself. I've just always been betting on myself, believing in myself. And if you get the 14 million, how much money do I really need? I only really need 20 million because I already got the 14 million in the bank. I got still more guaranteed money because with the 33 million,
sure,
I only need 20 million. Yeah. So if I play, right, I don't need that big contract. All I need is 20 million.
But
it just seems to me, somebody comes up to you and goes, hey, here's your $14 million. The money that we owe you, that you signed the contract. Yeah, just show up to work and we're going to give you 14 million. Nope, I got a better idea. I'm going to take out a $14 million insurance policy so that I can maybe get 30 million. That's the move. You keep that money. You mean your money? This is your money. No, keep it. I got a plan. No, I always say yes. It just seems that if somebody's going to give you $14 million, you take the money all the time. Injury. Because listen, if he had a Pro Bowl season last year, he probably could have got more. Who cares if you're a year more wear on you? You'd still get a big upfront. It seems. I don't know. I'm not an agent. I don't know what the hell they do, but I don't know. I don't buy the idea that I go, hey, listen, you go up to somebody and go, listen, I'll give you $5 if you promise to give me 10. It seems like you're only getting $5, especially if the person was going to give you the $10 anyway. The whole insurance policy thing seems like a very poor way of thinking about it. Nick Wright is great with statistics, not the best financial analyst in my opinion. But again, the point I'm making is you make bad decisions sometimes. And I'm not even hating on Le'Veon Bell for the decision. Listen, if you've been to Vegas or some casino and you're at the blackjack table, there's a rule. I don't know if it's a rule, but the strategy is this. If you've got 14 or 15 or something like that, and you see that the dealer has a 6 showing, you don't take a hit because you want to assume that the dealer has 16 and the dealer has to take a hit on 16 or less. And because the chances of a face card showing up are pretty good, you don't want to take the hit, get a face card, and bust when the dealer would have taken that card. So if you see a 6, you're supposed to not take a hit, let the dealer take the face card. Now, it doesn't always work. It's no guarantee you're going to win because I've sat at that table a bunch of times where the dealer will have like a 6 and it'll be like a 2 under it. And then the dealer will take like 11 more cards and never bust and hit exactly 21. So it's not like it's a guarantee you're going to win. It's just the odds favor you, apparently, if you let the dealer take the card. That's the move. That's the way to go. Now, that being said, there are many times where I've taken the card and busted. And as the dealer is sliding my chips away, all $20, $25, because I don't play the big money. I don't go, boy, that was a great move, taking the card and win the deal. I don't say that. I know it was a bad move. I know it was a dumb idea. So it's not that Le'Veon Bell shouldn't have done it. You want to roll the dice, roll the dice. You think you're worth more, you're going to have to find out. But what you don't want to do is after it gets all, like the English say, gets all pear-shaped, to have somebody like Nick Wright come up to you and say, it was a great idea, what you did. Because it's not, you don't learn that way. That's the point. Oftentimes, the best way to learn things is harsh, direct criticism. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there who are more concerned about your feelings than you understanding the world properly. And those people, in my opinion, unless it's your mom, they're supposed to do that. People who really love you, they're supposed to lie to you and tell you that you didn't make a bad decision. But there should be people who care about you and people maybe who don't care about you. They're going to give you the harsh, honest truth. And the truth here is, looking back, hindsight, it was a bad decision that Le'Veon Bell made. Unless he just hated playing for the Steelers and wanted out. But again, he could have had the same thing and $14 million because he would have been a free agent anyway. So I don't see any way you can look at this and say it was a good idea or frame it that it was a $14 million insurance policy. It just seems absurd. So you make a bad decision, it happens. You hit on when the dealer has 16, it happens. But don't con yourself, or don't even have people around you at that time who are going to lie to you and say, I shouldn't say lie, that's a harsh word, who are going to tell you that you made a good decision when it was clearly a bad one. That's really the point of this. Be careful who you listen to. You may think they're haters. A lot of people go, if somebody's going to criticize you today, they're automatically put in the hater category. Nah, sometimes they're just giving you the straight scoop. They're just telling you how it really is. So be careful of that. So that's it. That's the Uncolored podcast today. That's the Uncolored Sports section. I hope you enjoyed it. Next week, we're going to come back with a very serious issue that I know almost nothing about. It's going to be quantum mechanics. Not because I know anything about quantum mechanics, but I've been looking over it in the last couple of weeks. And I'll tell you what, every time I look at some of these lectures, it just blows my mind, the implications of this thing. So I'm going to try and whittle it down as best as I can, or at least try to explain it as best as I can, but I'll probably just have you listen to other people who know what they're talking about. And I'll just tell you what I think the implications of that are. So be sure to come back for the next podcast. You can get the podcast anywhere. Please subscribe to the podcast and download it and comment. I don't know what the hell you do with the podcast, but you can get it any place, iTunes, Google Play, that kind of stuff. So thanks for listening. My name's Kevin Metcalf. I'm the host, and this is the Uncolored Podcast.